Hey everybody, this is Perch. I have a question here about comics and movies. And you might ask yourself, why are so many of these discussions, why are they tied together? And I mean, lots of people have lots of different reasons. I mean, for me, the comics and the movies create an interesting connection because if you started reading comics in the 80s and the 90s, the idea of these stories that you were reading making their way to the big screen was pretty magical of a concept. I mean, that seemed pretty cool. Who wouldn't want to see this stuff? Being able to kind of relive some of those adventures. Craven's Last Hunt. Can you imagine if they did a movie on that? It'd be amazing. And so when you got into comics and through the 90s, I remember talking to a lot of people who would have loved to see kind of the Rob Liefeld X-Force, translated kind of a lot of, I mean, hell, even No Man's Land, some of these different events, the death of Superman, the idea that you could have a movie featuring this stuff was pretty amazing. And we had to live through a bunch of, I would say, pretty shitty movie news. There was this whole Nick Cage is going to be Superman rumor for a while, but anyway, it got to be that the idea of a movie off your comics was like the pinnacle. That was going to be nothing. It was legitimized comics once and for all. They would be on the big stage where they belong. That's how you used to think if you were in the 80s and 90s. Now, of course, 2023, I guess it's 2023 for you probably listening to this. It's not yet for me recording this. But anyway, uh, 2023, you have to look around now with a ton of superhero movies, a lot of drama, a lot of gossip, chaos around those films. And it doesn't seem quite as exciting as, as it did, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. The idea that there would be these movies was just it was great. And now that we've got them, I don't know. It's suddenly it's not as cool as it once was. But there's where we are. So let's get to this mail and maybe we'll get more into movies. It says, "Hey Perch, I had a theory and I'd like your take on it. I was wondering about recent comics and how much they've been influenced by the movies. I'm not talking about whole story arcs ripped from superhero movie plots, although that has happened. What I'm suggesting is a little different. First, I'm going with the supposition that the current crop of writers at the Big Two, simply put, are by and large not as talented as their predecessors from previous generations. And further, that as a primary reason for this is that the current writers aren't as familiar with the histories of the comics that they're writing." Let me pause here for a second, and regardless of whether you think the writers are better or worse, there's a lot of writers who have said in interviews they're not that familiar with the histories of the characters they're writing. They volunteered this. This isn't like, some kind of hateful video or attack. It's the creators themselves have said this, that they're not that familiar, and hey, I've just got hired to write the New Mutants, and so I'm gonna go and read, I'm gonna get access to the Marvel offices and go read a bunch of New Mutants, which as a statement always seemed bizarre to me. Particularly, I mean, for a variety of reasons. I mean, first of all, why are you getting hired to write the New Mutants if you do not, if you have to go read to research the New Mutants? That seems very weird to me. That's a strange choice. And then the idea of like, hey, I'm going to go to the Marvel archives and read through the library. I mean, you do know that Marvel has this what Marvel Infinite digital comics app. That exists, right? Why are you having to go down to the Marvel offices? I mean, you hate digital, okay, but still, this all the you think in an interview that Marvel's supporting or lined up for you, you'd at least want to pitch in and kind of support the digital products that your companies offer. I don't know. I call me crazy, but the part that gets me is whenever writers like, yeah, I was never that familiar with the character, so then Marvel or DC came and they knocked on my door and said, hey, how would you like to write this thing? I was like, sure, I'll give it a whirl. I mean, it's like, really? I don't know. That always seems strange. But regardless, we'll go back to the mail. It says, that said, it seems that elements and common knowledge about characters, history, relationships, even artistic character design choices, etc., are taken from the movie and TV series versions of these characters, even when the movie versions contradict the traditional canon. I suspect that this is more common for Marvel because unlike DC, Marvel has been able to build a singular coherent cinematic universe from which to draw from. Well, sort of. Kevin Feige reportedly has said that he foresaw a time when the comics would be unnecessary for him to make Marvel movies. His quote is basically that there would be movies that do not need to borrow comic storylines to go in, and I think we crossed that line already, right? I don't think this is something that is could happen in the future. I think we're there. I mean, Ant-Man Quantumania, is that ripped from the comics? Hell, the last Ant-Man movie, Ant-Man and Wasp, was that ripped from, I mean, what parts of that were, I mean, you get little scenes that they recreate from the comics, but I think in terms of the story, I mean, what was Civil War really, connected to Civil War the comic in really any way whatsoever? I don't know. Anyway, um, while I know that rankles some fans, goes the mail, he has a point that he's building a large franchise in which he is able to stand on its own because of all lore built into it from film to film. Yeah. I don't think that Kevin Feige, by the way, in the MCU should be bound by the comics. I mean, it is a different thing. Let it be a different thing. It's fine. The problem is maybe what you're getting to in this mail. It says, but one of the side effects is that now the comics also draw from the movies, even in using elements that differ from the comics canon when the movie changed these things solely for easier plot flow or easier narrative reasons. And the current creators don't know well enough to leave those things out or draw on them for other reasons that disregard comic canon. So movies are actually becoming part of the canon as they are used as sources. Do you think there's support for this theory? Um, I think, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's a theory. I think it's pretty obvious that is happening. I think that, what you're getting is a number of writers who are less familiar with the comics for sure, and they are familiar with the movies. The movies are easier to watch and check out. I think this is particularly true when you get to people who have careers in other places, like a Rainbow Rowell, for example, who has a career outside of comics, a more healthy career writing kind of YA type stuff. And so when you see her do She-Hulk or do some of these comics that she's done, she is heavily drawing from the show canon. There was stuff in the Runaways book that she did that was clearly influenced by the TV show, the very low watched. That was on Hulu, right? Anyway, just very low watched show, and it was weird. Every now and then it would just crop up as part of the character's history that didn't make any sense in the comics, since the comic had clearly defined it a different way. So I do think there's a problem there. I don't think this goes to a good place. You're right in that there's this merging and mingling of comics and movies. And I think that it is perfectly acceptable for the movies to just be their own thing, to not cross over. Why should they cross over? They don't need to. Um, I think they can kind of reference it. It's funny because people will say things like, "Oh, it's way too difficult for anyone to digest, movie lore versus comic lore." It's not that hard. People figure it out. They're okay. So somebody, people can ascertain the difference. This is old movie time, but between kind of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, with with a serious take on that show, and then Robin Hood Men in Tights. People are aware that they're both Robin Hood, but they're doing vastly different things, and one's a comedy and one's, I mean, maybe a comedy in hindsight, but they're very different movies. And nobody's sitting there going, I don't know, having both these things called Robin Hood is too complicated for my puny brain. I can't figure this out. Nobody is saying that. So I think that's it. You do not need the comics and the movies to align, but I do think it indicates a problem in that if you have writers that you're hiring who are not familiar with the source material, who maybe don't even like it but are happy to get a gig, I don't know, and they're drawing from the movie, and you do not have an editorial team there sitting there going, "Whoa, wait a second, that's movie lore there. That's not comics. You've strayed off course. Reverse." If you don't have somebody doing that, which they clearly don't, then what where are you? I think that you get into trouble. Anyway, thank you very much for the mail. I don't. What do the rest of you think about this theory? Are the movie, or should we all just submit and realize that the movies, because they make more money, because they have been seen by more people, that is a dominant canon? And if there is like a question of like movies versus comics, the movies automatically win. They make more money, so screw it. Movie wins. Is that where we're at? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course. And thanks for listening.